Deep underground in an undisclosed location, this is Tread Comics presents the history of Miracleman. Marvelman, also known as Miracleman, is a fictional superhero appearing in comic books first published by L. Miller and Son Limited. Marvelman was created in 1954 by writer-artist Mick Anglo for publisher L. Miller and Son, originally as a United Kingdom homegrown substitute for the American character Captain Marvel. The series ran until 1963. It was revived in 1982 in a dark postmodern reboot by writer Alan Moore, with later contributions by Neil Gaiman. In 1953, the American company Fawcett Comics, which was the U.S. publisher of Captain Marvel, discontinued the title because of a lawsuit from DC Comics. Len Miller and his company, L. Miller and Son Limited, had been publishing black and white reprints of the series along with other Fawcett titles in the UK. Rather than stopping, he turned to comic packager Mick Anglo for help continuing or replacing the comic. They transformed Captain Marvel into Marvelman, while Miller continued his other Fawcett reprinted titles and used logos and trademarks that looked significantly like Fawcett's. This added to the appearance that Fawcett line was continuing and that Marvelman was still Captain Marvel in order to retain the audience. Marvelman was similar to Captain Marvel. A young reporter named Mickey Moran encountered an astrophysicist instead of a wizard, who gives him the superpowers based on atomic energy instead of that of magic. To transform into Marvelman, he speaks the word Kimota, which is phonetically atomic backwards, rather than that of Shazam. Instead of Captain Marvel Jr. and Mary Marvel, Marvelman was joined by Dickie Dauntless, a teenage messenger boy who became young Marvelman, and young Johnny Bates, who became Kid Marvelman. Both of their magic words were Marvelman. In the UK, Captain Marvel issue 19 and Captain Marvel Jr. issue 19 announced the forthcoming replacement of these heroes, and with issue 25 of each title, both cover dated February 3rd, 1954, they were retitled as Marvelman and Young Marvelman. Marvelman family was added to the lineup 2 years later. Among the studio artists Anglo assembled to produce the comics were Dennis Gifford and Don Lawrence. Marvelman and Young Marvelman each had 346 issues, issues 25 through 370, published weekly, except for the final 36 issues, which were monthly, reprinting old stories. Marvelman Family was monthly that usually featured Marvelman, Young Marvelman, and King Marvelman together, from October of 1956 to November of 1959. A variety of Marvelman and Young Marvelman albums were printed annually from 1954 to 1963. Mick Anglo's association with Len Miller ended in 1960. A disgruntled Anglo then recycled some of his Marvelman stories as Captain Miracle, published under his Anglo Comics imprint, which folded in 1961. Anglo always claimed ownership of Marvelman, and although creators' rights were almost unheard of in this British comic industry of the 1950s and 1960s, at least some of Anglo's Marvelman stories do have a tiny copyright Mick Anglo in the margins, lending a measure of credibility to Anglo's claim of ownership. At the height of their success, the British Marvel saw a series of Italian reprints. Gordon and Gotch, one of Australia's largest comic publishers, also published reprint editions. In Brazil, British Marvelman stories were reprinted in the same titles as Fawcett's original Captain Marvel. However, in Brazil, Marvelman became known as Jack Marvel. Though the Marvelman titles were successful for a considerable amount of time, this changed abruptly in 1959 when changes in British law allowed comics to be imported from the United States. The black and white Marvelman books were unable to compete with the full-color imports, forcing Miller to cancel Marvelman Family, downgrading the other two titles to monthly status, and used reprinted adventures for their content. The two series survived until 1963, when Miller ceased publication and filed for bankruptcy. In March 1982, a new British monthly black and white anthology comic was launched, called Warrior. Editor-publisher Des Skin had decided from the beginning to revive Marvelman as one of these features, explaining, quote-unquote, "It was always going to be Marvelman. I knew the character's history. I had a few annuals as a kid, and those cheap and nasty little comics. Wasn't particularly thrilled with them outside of occasional stunning art, but I'd always had a soft spot for Mick Anglo. So given the difference between a brand new character who would sell no more copies or a somewhat forgotten character who might sell a dozen more, I opted to follow the similar relaunch I'd done with Captain Britain. Tease at first, then, as a bonus, surprise those who actually cared. If it failed, it was only 6 pages out of 52. The beauty of the anthology approach." Skin's first two choices to write Marvelman were Steve Parkerhouse and Steve Moore. Both expressed a lack of interest. When Moore told Skin that his friend Alan Moore, no relation to Steve, would quote-unquote give his eye teeth to write Marvelman, Skin agreed to let him submit a pitch for the series. Skin's first picks for artists were Dave Gibbons and Brian Bolin, but again both declined, leaving Skin to reluctantly give the assignment to Gary Leach, the one artist he could find with interest in the project. Leach used actor Paul Newman as the model for his rendition of Marvelman. Warrior featured a new, darker version of Marvelman written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Gary Leach, who was soon replaced by Alan Davis when Leach's laborious and perfectionist approach threatened deadlines. Marvelman was also lettered by Annie Parkhouse. In the first issue of Warrior, Michael Moran is presented as married, plagued by migraines, having dreams of flying, and unable to remember a word that had such significance in his dreams. In his initial run of Marvelman stories, Moore touches on many themes of his later work, including the superhero as a source of terror, the sympathetic villain, and exploring the mythology of established fictional characters. Warrior published a Marvelman special collecting Mick Anglo's stories within a framed story by Moore. The former Atlas Comics, renamed Marvel Comics shortly before the original Marvelman was canceled, objected to the word Marvel in the series title. This was used as the publisher's official explanation as why Marvelman ended on a cliffhanger in Warrior issue 21, August of 1984, while the anthology itself went on for another 5 issues. But the actual reason was a series of bitter financial arguments between Skin and Alan Moore. With the series discontinued, Skin licensed the material to American publishers, first to Pacific Comics, and after Pacific's collapse, to Eclipse Comics. In August of 1985, Eclipse began reprinting the Marvelman stories from Warrior, colored and resized. They were renamed and relettered throughout as Miracleman to avoid further problems with Marvel Comics. Issues 1 through 6 reprinted all the Warrior content, after which Eclipse began publishing new Miracleman stories from Moore and new artist Chuck Beckham, now known as Chuck Austin. Austin was soon replaced by Rick Vetrick and then John Tolkben. Eclipse split the rights to the character, with 2/3 of Miracleman going to Eclipse and 1/3 split between the current writer and artist of the series. Moore wrote the series until issue 16. A glimpse of how Alan Moore originally meant for the story to continue is presented in Warrior issue 4. Warrior issue 4 is also known as the Warrior Summer Special. It features Miracleman and Azakorn gathering energy for their final battle with Kid Marvelman. Miracleman was a featured character in the miniseries Total Eclipse, 1988 through 1989. A short story by Neil Gaiman and Mark Buckingham titled Screaming appeared in Total Eclipse issue number 4, making it Gaiman's first published Miracleman story. This story was reprinted in issue 21 and in the Golden Age trade paperback. Gaiman and Buckingham picking up the series in issues number 17 of Miracleman, which was published in June of 1990. 3 volumes were planned, consisting of 6 issues each: The Golden Age, The Silver Age, and ultimately, The Dark Age. The Golden Age showed the world some years later, a utopia gradually being transformed by alien technologies and benignly ruled by Miracleman and other parahumans, though he has nagging doubts as to whether or not he has done the right thing by taking power. Gaiman's focus in the Golden Age is less the heroes themselves than the people who live in this new world, including a lonely man who becomes one of Miracle Woman's lovers, a former spy whose tale recalls J.G. Ballard's short story War Fever and several duplicates of Andy Warhol. Eclipse followed up the Golden Age by publishing the standalone 3-issue miniseries Miracleman Apraka, written and illustrated by a variety of other creators, with framing pages by Gaiman and Buckingham. These stories did not form part of the main narrative, but instead further fleshed out the world of the Golden Age. 2 issues of the Silver Age appeared, but Eclipse went bankrupt in 1994 and ceased publication of Miracleman with issue 24. Issue number 25 was completed but never published. Gaiman had approved a spin-off series called Miracleman Triumphant, which was written by Fred Burke and penciled by Mike Deodato Jr. and inked by Jason Miner. Most of the first issue of Miracleman Triumphant was complete and ready for printing, and the second was scripted, but like Miracleman issue 25, The 2 issues would remain in publishing limbo after Eclipse's collapse. Issue 23 and 24 saw the resurgence of young Miracleman and described the beginning of a troubled Miracleman idyllic world. A few pages of issue 25 were leaked to various websites and appeared in Greg Katori's book, Kimota, the Miracleman Companion. The Dark Age would have seen the full return of Kid Miracleman and completed the story. In 1996, legendary comic artist Todd McFarlane purchased Eclipse's creative assets, including the purported Miracleman rights, for a total of $25,000. In 2001, McFarlane said he owned all the rights relating to Miracleman, dismissing Neil Gaiman's claim of co-ownership. Neil Gaiman had claimed co-ownership by inheriting the 1/3 part of Miracleman from Alan Moore when Alan Moore left the series. McFarlane announced that the character would appear in Hellspawn. McFarlane introduced Mike Moran, Miracleman's alter ego, in Hellspawn issue 6 with the alleged intention of returning Miracleman himself in Hellspawn issue 13. McFarlane included Miracleman in his section of what was the long-delayed Image Comics 10th anniversary book. He released a Miracleman cold cast statue as well as a 4-inch, 10cm scale action figure that was partnered with Spawn in the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive 2-pack. It had been McFarlane's intention to use the character in his core title. Since the hardcover storyline became a direct tie-in to the events of Spawn issue 150 and beyond, Miracleman was changed to a mysterious new character known as the Man of Miracles. His appearance as Miracleman is explained by Man of Miracles' ability to shapeshift and the fact that people see him as they wish. In 2001, Gaiman formed Marvels and Miracles LLC, a company's whose goal was to clear up the ownership of Miracleman long-term. In 2002, Gaiman sued McFarlane over his unauthorized use of Miracleman and the characters he had created for Spawn. According to Gaiman, the evidence presented in the course of the lawsuit revealed that the rights for Miracleman were not included in McFarlane's purchase of Eclipse assets, as they were not Eclipse's assets to begin with. They were in fact licensed. Also in 2002, Gaiman wrote the series 1602 for Marvel. Gaiman's profits from this series went to Marvels and Miracles LLC to aid in his legal fight over Miracleman. Gaiman's dedication in the collected edition of 1602 reads, quote-unquote, to Todd for making it necessary. Harsh. In a huge surprise that rocked the comic book industry, in 2009 it emerged that original creator Mick Anglo had retained the rights to Marvelman from the beginning. This meant that the purchase of those rights by the parties of Quality Communications, Eclipse Comics, and Todd McFarlane themselves were illegitimate. At the San Diego Comic-Con in 2009, Marvel Comics announced they had purchased the rights to Marvelman, what they considered one of the most important comic book characters in decades, from Mick Anglo. In June of 2010, a Marvelman Classic Primer one-shot was published. It featured new art and interviews with Mick Anglo and others involved in Marvelman's history. In July of that same year, a new ongoing series called Marvelman's Family's Finest launched, reprinting Marvelman's greatest adventures. a hardcover reprint edition, Marvelman Classics Volume 1, was released in August. These reprints contain only early material. Alan Moore has stated that he would donate some of his royalties from any Marvel comic reprints of his Marvelman stories to the family of Mick Anglo. At the New York Comic Con in 2013, Marvel Comics announced they had solidified their rights to Miracleman, and that Neil Gaiman would finish the story he had started 25 years earlier. The series adopted a giant-sized format, with each issue containing a reprint of the corresponding issue of the Eclipse comic series, reprints of select Mick Anglo Marvelman stories, and non-fiction material such as essays, photos, and Marvelman design sketches. The first issue reprinted the recolored and relettered stories from Warriors, issue 1 and 2, also known as the Eclipse Miracleman #1, and was released on January 15th of 2014. The reprints continued, collecting remastered and recolored works of the original run, with hardcover editions following. In September of 2014, the first new Miracleman material under the Marvel Comics banner was announced, featuring a lost story by Grant Morrison that he wrote in the 1980s and drawn by Joe Quesada. It was joined by a brand new story by Peter Milligan and Mike Allred. The reprints proceeded through issue 16 when the series was retitled Miracleman, The Golden Age, which reprinted issues 17 through 22. Miracleman by Gaiman and Buckingham, The Silver Age. Issues 1, 2, 3 were announced for release in 2017, but those solicitations were canceled shortly thereafter. At the 2018 San Diego Comic-Con, at a retailer-only event, Marvel announced legal hurdles causing the cancellation had been resolved, and that the new series was supposed to begin publication in the year 2019, with the previously announced creative team Gaiman and Buckingham on board. As of January 2020, however, the new series has not yet appeared.